Okay, on behalf of the American Numismatics Association, the Convention Committee, the San Francisco, California, I welcome you here. Bob, Dr. Chandler, and I go back about, what, 7, 8, 10, 12, 13 years that I've known him and invited him. I think I've invited you, this is the 38th time or something like that I've invited you. And we have a little joke that if something happens, I can't continue to talk if necessary. But Bob's a great friend, a great promoter of Californiana and San Francisco. And even though the talk is on Wells Fargo, a name that is legendary, incidentally, sidebar, the branch is just down the street around the corner if you need to do any transactions.
Leave all your money.
Leave all your money and everything. This is not the only thing he can talk about, and hopefully in future years you might talk to him because he's got some other great topics. Very much. It's all yours, Doctor.
Thank you. So this I do the slides.
Yeah, that does the slides.
Is it on? Are we all on? Am I wired?
Yes.
Well, I'm delighted to be here to give you a little propaganda, or excuse me, to talk to you about Wells Fargo and Company. A lot of the numismatic part will be familiar since Dave Bowers, Don Kagan, Ron Gillio, Bob Leonard, Edgar Adams, J. Rowe, and a sanctified bird, that's a holy bird, have written on this material. Do you want to douse the lights and we'll go from there?
We're doing that right now.
This is, okay. I can't see from up here. James Marshall at Sutter's Mill, January 24th, 1848. Instead of helping his employer, and all of you who are employers know the problem here, guys, you're paying goof off on the job. Marshall was supposed to be building a sawmill to help produce housing lumber and such for the settlers flowing in. But he was also an amateur geologist and noticed the quartz there and decided to use the tail race for this undershot water mill as a giant sluice. And of course, you know the result. The world rushed in, because indeed he had found a gold mine. This, incidentally, is a mural by Anton Refrigere down in the Rincon Annex. We're on Mission Street. This is at the foot of Mission Street, done in the 1940s. This is what they sought. Gold dust, valued in 1848 at $16 per troy ounce. Fred's probably handled this because it came off to Central America. What we're going to find is that California money was exceedingly chaotic and the government was more of a hindrance than a help. As you might say, when miners came out here, the experience was known as seeing the elephant. It goes back to the story of the farmer in the early republic who would do anything to see a pachyderm. One day he finally heard that the circus was coming to town, and yes, they had an elephant. So he harnessed up his cart and drove into town. Outside of town, they met the circus. So indeed, the farmer saw the elephant. But so did his horse. And the whole mess ended up in the ditch, splintered. The farmer very banged up, but yes, he had seen the elephant. So it came to exemplify the experience of good and bad going to California. And that's what we're going to have with California money, where Californians first had to make do and finally pummel the government into doing something. But even then, not until the 1880s did you really get a unified money within California. The state constitution says we ain't gonna have any of this paper stuff like they have back in the eastern United States, where paper was the circulating money. People could grow old and die without ever having seen a U.S. gold coin. Worn Spanish silver circulated for small change, and paper banknotes was common everyday money. These, of course, the Suffolk Bank at Boston put its imprint on them of what it thought of them. There were 10,000 different banknotes by some of these banknote reporters, and counterfeiting and horse thievery were the two greatest crimes in pre-Civil War America. They fed into each other, particularly if you had to get out of town quickly. So Californians started making their own coins. This is the upper part of the City Hotel bordering Portsmouth Plaza, and you can see it's Baldwin and Company, who did in 49, 50, you had these private refiners making coins, which unfortunately were somewhat lightweight. So depending on who was doing the expose, they kept being driven out of circulation. There's one of them. Of course, they're quite rare and valuable today because they were considered lightweight and driven out of circulation or melted, so not that many are around. Then the United States government says, okay, we are going to have a United States Assay Office under Augustus Humbert, and we will make coins that will be true value, which they did in 1851. This is a $50 gold piece, 2.5 ounces, or a 5 eagle piece if you like birds. However, this is the only piece that the government authorized. Now, if all you had today, after 150 years of inflation, was $50 bills, you'd even have a little problem making change. This was the government at work. However, these private minters made full value gold coins in $10 and $20 denominations. And finally, the government relented and says, okay, the assay office could make $10 and $20 coins. Of course, then it said they all have to be 900 fine, so they had to do some adjusting. Californians made these coins from 25 cents to $50. You saw the $50. This is a 50-cent piece. 1854, the miner wrote he was enclosing a couple of half gold half dollars for his kids. Then there was the problem of change. Normally Californians just sort of shoveled it and did everything by size. And anything about that size counted as a quarter, which meant the French franc with about 18 cents silver, Austrian 20 cruiser, about the same. Now, for one or two transactions, this wouldn't amount to much, but people in San Francisco started importing kegs of these and passed these 18-cent coins off for 25 cents and pocketed the change, as it were. In October 4th, 1854, the San Francisco banks got together and says, a quarter is a quarter. We're just only taking these other coins at their bullion value. They would no longer pass for 25 cents. So we get our guys. Weird-looking guy on the left with the white beard, yeah, not him. That's Henry Wells. And of course that means that William George Fargo is on the right. They were expressmen in New York. I'm sure you've all used Federal Express, UPS, and all those good things. So the express business is still here. The rapid movement of valuables, started by William Herndon in 1839. And of course, what Mr. Herndon carried most of all were banknotes. So again, you have the numismatics. Out in California, Wells and its competitors would carry money, which meant gold. They would also, because the state constitution said there will be no incorporated banks, and banks will not be able to issue paper money, that Wells would be a banking house. Further, since in those ancient days, the post office had difficulties delivering letters, Wells Fargo had its own letter express, which actually existed until 1895. The first express of the great eastern ones into California was Adams and Company in November of '49. Wells Fargo was not here because Wells and Fargo had some unfinished business to do. They were in a rate war with another express. And usually what happened when expresses got into rate wars was that they bought each other out or combined. So on March 18, 1850, Wells and Fargo and John Butterfield decided you couldn't leave home without them. So they formed the American Express Company, with Wells as president, Butterfield as vice, and Fargo as secretary. The problem, of course, was that Fargo and Butterfield hated each other's guts and spent directors' meetings swearing at each other. Butterfield, being an old stage man, had the edge. So American Express would not come to California, but Wells and Fargo and their friends formed a new company, also on March 18th, but this time 1852, to come to California. They named it after themselves. Wells, incidentally, was a pioneer in cheap postage, challenging the government rates, which were up to 25 cents. He said he'd do everything for 5 cents, and that shocked them. He was also a pioneer telegrapher, building the first commercial lines out of Buffalo, New York, and of course an expressman, which I've mentioned. And the dream of his life was women's education. In 1868, he opened Wells College for Women in Aurora, New York, which is still going strong, which was the second women's college in the United States. Fargo was sort of your line superintendent, was also mayor of Buffalo, and just another politician. Our first office, Wells Fargo and Company, at 424 Montgomery Street, virtually where our corporate headquarters is today, advertising the various express services and routes, and in case the work got too heavy, there's the Union Saloon next door. Well, what did Wells do? Banking then revolved around purchasing gold dust, turning it into usable money, and then through paper drafts allowing miners to send it home. Our express office in Columbia, which is a state park. If you ever get up there, go see it, because it's the largest concentration of contemporary buildings. So a miner would come in with his dust. Agent Degner there at Columbia tore off the receipt so there'd be no double dipping. I think I had some figures here, but obviously I will not be able to read them. This is dust at 1830 per ounce, which is actually quite high, and almost 24 ounces, so it'd be worth about $10,000 today. The United States Mint coined gold at $20.67 an ounce. So that's the ratio we're dealing with. Or Wells would also express the output of the mines. This is the Golden Curry silver mine in the Comstock Lode of Virginia, Nevada. Cruciform shape, a very elegant building. Everyone loved it, it just didn't work very well. And investment grade stock, because the Golden Curry was one of those that actually paid dividends. And Wells Fargo in the 60s got into buying and selling mining stock. In fact, all the banks did. Just one more thing that we did. And here's a receipt stub sending down 268 pounds of Comstock silver mixed with gold, about 2% gold, by Wells Fargo for the Golden Curry mine. Wherever there were mines in the West and mining camps, Wells Fargo went there. So follow the red dots, as it were. This is a 1995 map. From that, Wells Fargo became an interstate bank. interstate banking is nothing new, nor is branch banking, as Wells and Adams and Company had their branches throughout the gold country of California. See what I've out there. I think it's Carson, Nevada, Salt Lake City, Portland, Oregon, and New York for those examples. So here we've loaded the gold in the treasure box, being put on a stagecoach, and we're taking it down to San Francisco. This is what they're looking for. This was a nice 200-ounce nugget. You can see the fricate nugget or fricot. Unfortunately, they don't give free samples, but the nugget is up in the State Mineralogical Exhibit in the Mariposa County Fairgrounds. But more importantly, this nugget rests on 3 gold bars, which, as far as I know, is the only contemporary photo of ingots. This was taken, say, late 65, early 66. The middle one is about 3.5 inches long and 100 ounces. But it's Kellogg, Houston, Hench and Burton, and Augustus P. Molitor, left to right. And on the dark Molitor one, you can see the chip for the assay where they did it diagonal. And of course, they have the number, the maker's name, the fineness, the value, and because of the time for these, the U.S. Internal Revenue tax stamps. And of course, I'm sure you've all seen the Central America treasure out on the bourse, where you can see real bars. And where did it come down to? Was to the United States Mint. This is the Granite Lady. Some of you have probably been on the tour to see the Mint. October 8th, the San Francisco Museum and Historical Society is going to do groundbreaking for turning this into a museum of San Francisco. And Don Kagan has been working mightily to get a large numismatic exhibit inside it also. To the branch mint, where you have the coining presses. And for California, as I say, gold was the circulating money. Back east, it wasn't. So you ended up with what they called mint drops, or double eagles to you. The San Francisco Mint was the smallest of all the mints and branch mints, yet it coined more 20s than all the others put together. Between 54 and 58, San Francisco coined about 3 million in double eagles, and all the other mints were about 2 million. Because Californians used gold as money. Back east, they didn't. So here we have Montgomery Street, the Wall Street of the West, as you might say. Cross Street here is California. Wells Fargo and Company is in the building on the left. Behind it are the photographers. Across the street are some of the assayers. Up the street, a block and a half, is the branch mint. Everything was in this area. And rather common casual banking in that time. Inside of Wells Fargo's office, you can see the great bullion scale on the left and a miner coming over to test it. The paying teller has stacks of double eagles for the 2 ladies who are, like wives always, are going on a shopping spree up the next block or 2 of Montgomery.
Oh, goody.
And of course, 2 other guys talking about the latest Reese River rush and how their mining stocks are going to blossom overnight. What happened, of course, is that the stock certificates are worth more now than they were then because there are collectors who like them for their designs. But this is our banking office. The other part of the equation, besides bringing gold down, was sending money back east. It's much easier to send a piece of paper rather than gold weighing 3.5 pounds per $1,000. So what Wells and the other banks would do would fill out the draft in either duplicate or triplicate, put the first one on the outgoing steamer, wait 2 weeks and put the second on the next steamer, and if there was a real catastrophe, they filled out a third. This is the problem. Burning of the Golden Gate in June of 1862 with 200 lives lost. Any of the paper drafts on this ship were lost, but the seconds would have gotten through. Wells also had to survive financial panics. All of you are very lucky to have the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to insure your deposits, something that came out of the Great Depression. Back then, there wasn't any such thing. And in this case, for Page and Bacon, Mr. Page on the left loaned too much money from his Missouri bank to the railroads on the right, so called on the branch house in San Francisco, the offices on the left lower, to send money by steamship, which they did, to bail them out. Unfortunately, the steamer was late, and by the time it pulled into New York, you can see they've taken to the lifeboats in the top vignette. When that news reached California, there was an immediately rush on Page, Bacon and Company. It was just panic, as you might say. People were just thronging the counter, and as soon as someone reached the counter, got their money, they picked him up, put him all over the heads of the people, put him on a check writing stand, and sent him out the door. The bank still closed. Adams and Company also closed. So you had, in this panic, the two largest banks in California wiped out. Wells Fargo survived. Then there was the late unpleasantness. Since I have some friends from Georgia here, we'll just call it the War of the Southern Rebellion so we don't hurt any feelings. Of course, I imagine they might know it as the War of Northern Aggression. This is from a South Carolina 25-cent banknote, firing of Fort Sumter in April of '61. Of course, the government needed money, so it decided to turn to the printing presses. In this N.C. Wyeth painting, you see Abe Lincoln looking even taller and thinner than usual, talking with Secretary of Treasury Chase about what to do in the crisis, in the dark days of the Civil War. Well, the next time you saw these characters, they were on unbacked paper money. As you can see, that's Mr. Chase at the top and Mr. Lincoln in the middle. And they even got so low as to do 3-cent pieces. That's fine for the East, because they were never on gold. California remained on the gold standard and told the government just what it could do with its money. There was a time in February of '64 when the assistant treasurer, who was a top federal official on the coast, went to a gold meeting and decided to tell the people about the glories of greenbacks. The people were very respectful. Hang him! Hang him! Hang him! And they chased him out of the building. And billhead said, payable in United States gold coin, or its equivalent. And the legislature passed an act which upheld this. So Californians had essentially discounted federal money. Or the federal government, looking at it another way, was issuing two types of money with different values. In '64, greenbacks got down to 39 cents on the gold dollar. If you were a federal employee paid in greenbacks, it wasn't so good. So of course, Wells Fargo would sell bills of exchange payable either in gold or greens, depending on what the customer wanted. The steamers were the main line of communication between San Francisco and the East, running down to Panama. Wells Fargo, of course, had its messengers aboard, looking after the gold, mail, and everything else. This is from the '60s, and it's an 1850s style steamer, say like either the Brother Jonathan or the Pacific. It's also blurry, which is hard to figure it out too. So we had our own mail system. By the 1860s, we delivered 3/4 of the letters within California. This is the best Vallejo cover that I ever know. It's from General Mariano Vallejo to Mrs. Vallejo, care of their son, Dr. Platon Vallejo, at Vallejo. And of course it says, please deliver immediately, which obviously Wells Fargo did. We also got involved with the Overland Pony Express, which is all of it's part of the Wells Fargo family, so it's one of these family things. A freighting firm, Russell, Majors, and Waddell, wanted to show the viability of the central route rather than the southern route to get a mail contract. So they would deliver mail between Missouri and California in 10 days, which was about half of the southern stage route and a little more, getting to about 1/3 of the steamer time. In 1861, due to the government failing to pay Russell, Majors, and Waddell, they went bankrupt, and Wells Fargo operated the western leg, but printed stamps for use on the whole route. You can see the pony stamp there on the left. Rates began at $5, soon dropped down to $1.61, which got Wells Fargo interested in stagecoaching. We'd been one of the partners of the Overland Mail Company in the 1850s, going from Missouri, El Paso to Los Angeles to San Francisco. In the 1860s, we were involved with staging over the Sierra, and then in the mid-60s, overland. So here you have Gutzen Borglum, his view of staging down the Sierra, which it was. It was really a cliffhanger. As one driver says, well, you know, if I can't hear the wheels rattle, I get pretty worried. And of course, it was dust all the way. The coaches would go from San Francisco to Virginia, Nevada in 24 hours. In 1866, we bought out Ben Holiday, not that Wells was so enamored with stagecoaching, but that it wanted to get Ben out of the way and to extend its express turf from Salt Lake City east to the Missouri River. So this is from 1867. You can see Sacramento to Omaha between the railheads costs you $300. It's not cheap. Comparable to airline fare today. One of our coaches in Salt Lake City, nice, elegant Concord coach. However, they would go only about 5 miles an hour. And of course, a day includes 24 hours. So you could get about 100, 125 miles a day. But it also meant that you slept where you sat. Yes, you had the choice of getting off a coach at one of the meal stations and wait for the next coach the next day, but you know, that coach might not have had a seat. And of course, Wells Fargo had very respectful horses pulling the coaches through the dust, and just to make the dust a little more strong, there were clouds of gnats. So it was not the most comfortable ride you had. That's why most people took the steamers. But still, Wells Fargo in the late 60s put together 3,000 miles of staging between Cisco, California, and North Platte, Nebraska, which were the railheads, north from Salt Lake to Fort Benton, Montana, north to Boise, Idaho, down into the White Pine District of Nevada, around the mountain camps of Denver, and to Reno and some of those places. Quite a stagecoach empire, which ended, of course, when the railroad was completed. This was the wave of the future, and it turned out to be the wave very much of Wells Fargo's future. The Central Pacific Railroad building eastward to join the Union Pacific, which of course They did meet, it did become an accomplished fact, and Wells Fargo got it stuck to it. Because there was a corporate raider named Lloyd Tevis who says, I'll wheedle an exclusive contract out of Leland Stanford and then hold up Wells Fargo. They want to ride on our railroad. The gold and silver spikes, which the only junior university in the state owns, that's of course the Leland Stanford Junior University, it being a junior university since Leland was the son of Leland Sr. And the old corporate raider himself, Lloyd Tevis. He always said he could outthink any 7 men, so anyone visiting him had to talk quickly. He set up this dummy express corporation, got in Stanford and his brothers, and gave the railroad contract to Stanford. Of course, as the railroad was the main link becoming throughout California, and of course going east, Wells Fargo caved in, gave the Central Pacific boys a third of its stock, and Tevis was president for 20 years, still a record. And of course, you can see how poor the railroad was. That's Mr. Stanford's house on the bottom and Mr. Hopkins' house on the top. And of course, that became known as Nob Hill. These people had need for a banking house. So Wells Fargo's banking is going to change from buying gold dust and selling exchange to being like a normal commercial bank. Deposits received, loans made on approved securities, et cetera, et cetera. So by the 70s, Wells Fargo was a regular commercial bank. And they branched out into other things, including agriculture. If you haven't sampled our California fruits and vegetables, this is what you're in for. Of course, good comes with bad, or bad comes with good. If I can even read my notes here, you might even be, because I don't know who issued that. Maybe I should ask my friend Lenny out there. Anyway, it seems that Wells Fargo had banished an employee, and a certain personage decided that the company had usurped prerogatives pertaining only to my royal self, and printed and circulated treasonable and rebellious documents. Banishment was threatened. Who was this? Joshua Abraham Norton, Emperor Norton I, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. A San Francisco character from 1859 to his death in 1880. He would survey the city, take care of its inhabitants, issue proclamations, and even the city directories. You'd go, Norton, Joshua, occupation, emperor. He also issued his own money. This is the earliest one that I know of, which is in the California State Library from 1870. It's one of his 50-cent banknotes. They began first in the style of receipts for receiving money, and then they evolved into banknote style. Now, as I mentioned, government currency, which was discounted. Emperor Norton's currency was the only paper San Francisco's immediately received at par. There were no discounts on His Majesty's money. To get the national banking system to California, Congress said, yes, you can have national banks here. Yes, they can issue notes, which will be redeemable in gold coin. But through the whole clearing system, even these were discounted by a couple of percent. First National Gold Bank of San Francisco is a member of the Wells Fargo family tree through its Crocker Bank merger. Then, of course, you had the problem with the Comstock load coming in and silver becoming a glut, the mints turning out trade dollars, which circulated, and because of the drop in the price of bullion, trade dollars were soon discounted by about 5–7%. Currency was in that same range, maybe down as low as 90. So in the 1870s, you had banks, including Wells Fargo, keeping accounts in 3 monies: gold, silver, and currency till 1878, 79, when currency reached par. They resumed coining standard silver dollars, and all was interchangeable with gold dollars. This is from the Bank of Napa, but you can see silver coin on the bottom, gold coin on the left, and currency draft on the right. Imagine the bookkeeping. And of course, salaried employees would immediately turn their paychecks into silver and gain a little edge. Wells Fargo's expanding in the 1880s by the railroad, night and day the Fargo way, as we like to say, or ocean to ocean and across the sea. We reached New York City by rail, the first express to go nationwide. Our express building in San Francisco at 2nd and Mission Streets. We're at 4th and Mission. Go down 2 blocks and that building's still there. A typical express office, this is at Antioch, 1908. Our hardworking clerk, agent, the map of the Santa Fe railroads on the wall, has a safe next to him, a stationery cabinet filled with the multitude of paperwork, and then even a desk behind him. The Wells Fargo wagon's coming down the street. Oh, please let it be for me. The music band, that's the famed Wells Fargo wagon. Wells Fargo would deliver anything from alligators to xylophones. It all came by. The wife was grimacing, but since some of my words were left up there, I can't continue longer. You're lucky. Wells Fargo also turned to the Chinese as valued customers. This is an anomaly. This is a 1952 card for a Chinese laundry on Montgomery Street, which of course is the Wall Street of the West. I don't think that lasted too long. And Wells Fargo, in spite of the Chinese exclusion laws and everything else, we published dual language directories of Chinese merchants for a half dozen or so major cities. And in this case, we obviously had a musically inclined Chinese on key who sent $230 safely from Drytown, Amador County, down to Sacramento at a charge of about 0.5%. Wells Fargo would also ship currency in these money packages, of which there were numerous regulations on how you did it. You had to stitch through the currency. So if any of you collect US currency and you have holes in the middle of it, it probably went by one of the express companies. Because then they would stitch through, tie it down, and put the wax seals on top of it. The wax would crumble, so if anyone played with it, it would crack. We also sent money by telegraphic transfer beginning in the mid-60s. So electronic transfers of funds is nothing new. The money order system developed by the post office in the mid-60s, but very cumbersome. Money orders had to be cashed at only the receiving post office. Wells Fargo money orders could be cashed at any of the express offices, and they interchanged. So department stores like Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward says, forget the postal stuff, use express money orders. And our symbol of security, a little pit bull, Jack the dog, sitting on the Wells Fargo treasure box. But sometime they were evilly disposed persons and the treasure box didn't quite make it. And they would hold up our stagecoaches, or stagecoaches carrying our express. Not very nice of them, was it? See how I'm doing on time before I get evicted. And Wells Fargo would then issue little memorials to these people. turn them in and get your money. This gentleman was not carrying an overly large revolver there. If you're reading the 16-shooter, that's a Winchester or Henry rifle. This particular person appeared in Calaveras County on a steep hill, ordered the stage driver to stop and throw down the box, which he looted, but he kept coming back, and he decided to leave a few mementos for Wells Fargo, because the problem was he was not really a stage robber, but a misunderstood literary man. Because you can see he signed this Black Bart, the P08, or poet. Here I lay me down to sleep, to wait the coming morrow, perhaps success, perhaps defeat, and everlasting sorrow. I've labored long and hard for bread, for honor, and for riches. But on my corns too long you've tread, you fine-haired sons of, etc. But come what will, I'll try it on. My condition can't be worse. But if there's money in that box, 'tis money in my purse, which was truth in advertising. Well, finally, after what became his last robbery, his 29th one, 28 were successful, he returned to the scene of his first crime. This time, a young hunter armed with a rifle came on the scene, and Black Bart had to skedaddle rather quickly. However, he dropped a handkerchief which had the laundry mark FX07 on it. Our chief of detectives, Jim Hume, figured that, well, there's only one city that's going to have enough laundries to mark clothes, that's San Francisco. He turned the handkerchief over to famed detective Harry Morse, who ran down this very distinguished looking gentleman on the left. It's a bunch of Daltons on the right. We aren't talking about them. Anyway, you can see his derby, diamond stick pin, gold-headed cane, looked every inch a gentleman who'd made his fortune and was enjoying it, which indeed he was. He claimed to be a mining engineer, but his mine was Wells Fargo treasure boxes. And of course, he used to take his meals, breakfast with the best of the San Francisco detective force. They sent him up to San Quentin for 4 years. He confessed to the last robbery. He got out and he's disappeared. So as you wander through the Bourse and the convention today, look for Black Bart, because he's still out there. We don't know what happened to him. 1918, Wells Fargo was nationwide with 10,000 offices. This was during World War I. The government had seized the railroads. On July 1, 1918, they combined all of the express companies. American, Wells Fargo, Adams, Northern, Great Northern, all became part of American Railway Express. And the Wells Fargo name disappeared from the nation, except for the bank in San Francisco, which merged in 1905 with the Nevada National Bank, hence the name on this brown back. This is our elegant office at Pine in California. We were in there about a year until April 18th, 1906. The San Francisco earthquake. This is taken from the Cole building, which is still there at California and Montgomery. And that building at the far right is what's left of the Wells Fargo office. Or from ground. Wells Fargo, within 3 days, resumed its banking in one of the directors' homes above the fire lines, and also all the banks worked out of the United States Mint at 5th and Mission. Here, the Granite Lady, which survived the fire, had coin, so commerce could go on. Wells Fargo telegraphed its correspondence, building destroyed, vaults intact, our position unimpaired. So here we are after the earthquake in a building that survived the quake at Market Montgomery. During the Great Depression, Wells Fargo did its best to ignore the presidential bank holidays and upstairs would cash checks, and it paid its dividends all through the Great Depression. 1907, there was another financial panic. All the banks got together and issued clearinghouse certificates from November of 07 till about January, February of 1908. And of course, Wells Fargo was very much involved with these. The commercial, this is our museum at 420 Montgomery between California and Sacramento. It's open weekdays, and best of all, it's free. Till then, Wells Fargo keeps on trucking. Questions?
Any questions?
Before they throw me out for the next speaker.
Well, Dr. Chandler?
Hey, you guys aren't going to let me get on.